Good evening, everyone. My name is Julius Amin. I am Professor of History and Endowed Chair in the Humanities here at the University of Dayton. And I want to thank you and welcome you to this event. President Eric Spina, Provost Paul Benson, deans and other members of the administration, community leaders, colleagues, staff, students, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Again, I want to thank you all for taking time off to be a part of this Global Voices Symposium. My thanks go to all the participants. Since 2017, the University of Dayton Global Voices Symposium has served our community by presenting stimulating and thought-provoking programs on global awareness and global engagement. This year, the symposium proudly presents Africa in Our Century, examining the growing importance of this continent for our present and our future. As with past programs, the 2022 symposium drew on the experiences and expertise of individuals from the University of Dayton campus and community leaders to discuss activities and initiatives which promote global education and engagement. Also, this year's program is particularly important. We are living in an era of the global pandemic, and as such, we have all been summoned to rethink several aspects of global engagement. Already, the presentations have challenged us not to hold back, to continue to step out of our bubbles and engage the world. This is a time of innovation, creativity, and action. Irrespective of the state of the world, we are summoned in the 21st century to look beyond our national, geographic, continental, and oceanic boundaries. Irrespective of the times we live in, issues which impact humanity are universal. Winston Churchill very well articulated some of the issues when he stated, quote, "All the great things are simple, and many can be expressed in a single word: freedom, justice, honor, duty, mercy, hope," unquote. Whether we live in Africa, America, Europe, Asia, or in another part of the world, we are all part of this global citizenship. And the presentations have captured that message. We feel grief for the people of Ukraine and of people in many parts of the world because flagrant efforts are being made to deprive them of their freedom. We grieve for Cameroon's Anglophone population because they are locked in a conflict over justice. We join the struggle against anti-Black racism because racism is a direct challenge to those universal truths. Speaking at the University of Cape Town almost 70 years ago, Robert Kennedy stated, quote, "Few will have the greatness to bend history, but each of us can work to change a small portion of the events. And in the total of these acts will be written the history of this generation," unquote. The Global Voices Symposium has repeatedly challenged each of us to do that, to do our part. Organizing a symposium such as this entails collaboration. And yes, we are humbled to have been able to tap into a brain trust here on campus and in the larger community. First, I express my thanks to the planning committee, Drs. Joanne Mawasha, Maria Vivero, Satan Nabena, Martha Hurley, Chris Agno, Roshanda Nenonene, Professor Furara Henry Jones, and Ms. Sangita Gosala. Thank you for all the conversations and the patience. I extend my gratitude to the University President, Dr. Eric Spina, whose vision that we create a university for the common good served as the engine room for our efforts. I extend our thanks to Dr. Paul Benson, Provost of the University of Dayton, who was present at the creation of the Global Voices Symposium and has been among its chief supporters. We thank you for your support. We thank Dr. Jason Pierce, the former Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, for his consistent support of this initiative. My thanks go to Dr. Amy Anderson, Associate Provost for Global and Intercultural Affairs and the Executive Director of the Center for International Programs, who believed in this initiative from the beginning and has always been very supportive. I want to also express my thanks to my former colleague, Dr. Larry Flockizer, who was instrumental in the creation of the Global Voices Symposium and has been an invisible part of the planning of the symposium of all the annual events. Our gratitude goes to all the presenters, students, staff, faculty, our colleagues from the city of Dayton, Miami University, and St. Clair Community College. It was a joy to listen to you. Finally, we want to recognize faculty, staff, students, and all present here today for buying into the idea that the University of Dayton and the larger community together make a global space, and therefore must continue to search for ways to turn that notion into reality. Ladies and gentlemen, I introduce to you Dr. Paul Benson, Provost of the University of Dayton.
Thanks very much, Julius. Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining tonight's webinar. I'm very glad that you've joined and hope you've been able to participate in the symposium sessions yesterday and today, which apparently have gone extremely well, have been very dynamic, lots of rich dialogue and presentation. I want to thank the Alumni Chair in Humanities Office and the outstanding campus planning team for their thoughtful work in developing this year's symposium. And I also want to thank the co-sponsors across campus for their support of these important conversations. Julius Amin obviously deserves special thanks for his leadership, his vision, and active campus and community-wide collaboration as our Alumni Chair in Humanities. The Global Voices Symposium has established an important presence and legacy on our campus. From the first symposium in 2017, to which Julius referred a few years ago, to subsequent symposia over the past 5 years, the theme of global voices has afforded a really fruitful point of departure for a broad spectrum of campus conversations, research presentations, and dialogues with community partners that touch on central elements of our mission as a locally engaged and globally committed university in the Catholic and Marianist educational traditions. The Global Voices framework connects powerfully with our curriculum, with co-curricular programming, with our expanding involvements in community-engaged scholarship and discovery, and our strategic efforts to become a more inclusive, equitable, and richly diverse university. This is work to which our mission calls us, even as it challenges us deeply, and even as our efforts are imperfect and our progress halting. This spring symposium addresses what is in many respects the most significant dynamic continent of our century, Africa, and the dazzling kaleidoscope of rich histories, cultures, intellectual contributions that have emerged from the multitude of societies that enliven the African continent and continue to influence and shape histories, cultures, intellectual contribution around the world. The context of the ongoing global COVID-19 pandemic should heighten our awareness of the multitude of ways in which our understandings of our own lives and the opportunities and challenges we face are inextricably linked to the lives of our African sisters and brothers and the opportunities and challenges they face as our neighbors in the human community. It's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Amy Anderson, Associate Provost for Global and Intercultural Affairs, who will introduce this evening's speaker. Thanks so much again for joining this evening's keynote and participating in this week's symposium. Amy?
Thank you so much, Paul, and welcome to everyone. I understand many of you are participating from around the world, so it's particularly my pleasure to be with you and to introduce our speaker. As Paul mentioned, I serve as the Associate Provost for Global and Intercultural Affairs, and this year's theme, Africa in Our Century, could not be more appropriate. Many of the comments I've heard throughout the symposium express the need for us to truly understand and engage the fullness of Africa, including its brilliant people, contributions, and ideas. On a personal note, I would not be here tonight in this role if it were not for Africa. As a Peace Corps volunteer in Togo back in the late 80s, the experience and the people profoundly shaped my worldview. I met many brilliant people and was exposed to important ways of knowing and being. The experience inspired my own scholarly interest in the intercultural development process, and I certainly received much more than I contributed during those 2 years. Tonight, we are fortunate to hear from Dr. Landry Signé, a world-renowned scholar, teacher, writer, activist, advisor, public intellectual, consultant, entrepreneur, board member, commentator, keynote speaker, and award winner. Please allow me to give you just a sampling of his background and accomplishments. Professor Landry Signé was born in Cameroon and grew up and was educated in Cameroon, France, and Canada before coming to the United States. He also spent time in the United Kingdom and has traveled all over the world, which has led him to explore many innovative and diverse communities and countries, shaping his vision of the world. Professor Signé studied at University of Lyon 3, Sciences Po Paris, and Sander Institute in France, and earned his PhD from the University of Montreal, where he was awarded the Best International PhD dissertation. He completed his postdoctoral studies at Stanford University and earned the Banting Fellowship for Best and Brightest Researcher internationally. He has also completed executive business and leadership programs at the University of Oxford Said School of Business and Harvard Kennedy School. He currently serves as the managing director and professor at the Thunderbird School of Global Management. He is senior fellow in the Global Economy and Development Program at the Africa Growth Initiatives at the Brookings Institute. He's also the Distinguished Fellow at Stanford University's Center for African Studies, and he's a member of the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council on Agile Governance and its Regional Action Group for Africa. He also serves as chairman of the Global Network for Africa's Prosperity. He's senior advisor to top global leaders and author of numerous books, including Unlocking Africa's Business Potential, Innovating Development Strategies in Africa, the Role of International, Regional, and National Actors, and African Development, African Transformation, How Institutions Shape the Development Strategy. Professor Signé's accomplishments have been recognized internationally with dozens of distinctions and accomplishments. He was selected as a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader for finding innovative solutions to some of the world's most pressing issues, an Andrew Carnegie Fellow for being one of the most creative thinkers, a Desmond Tutu Fellow for driving the transformation of Africa, a Woodrow Wilson Public Policy Fellow for preeminent scholarship, uniting the world of ideas to the world of policy. I could go on and on. As a pioneer in Silicon Valley, he's the first to have taught an award-winning course at Stanford, Emerging African Markets, Strategies, Investments, and Government Affairs, and received Stanford Centers for African Studies Distinguished Leadership Award for innovative teaching, outstanding mentorship, and exceptional service to the community. He has been on numerous global boards and councils and often engages with global policymakers and business leaders to bridge the world of ideas and practice. He has testified before the US Senate and the US International Trade Commission, and his work has also appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Foreign Affairs, Foreign Policy, CNBC, Forbes, The Hill, and Harvard International Review, among others. With all those amazing accomplishments, in case you can't imagine that he would have any time for any kind of fun, he's also developed along the way the love for thrill-seeking hobbies, from safaris to skydiving to shark diving and more. Without further ado, Unlocking Africa's Potential in a Time of Competition Between Rising and Global Powers, please help me welcome Dr. Landry Signé.
Thank you very much, Associate Provost Anderson, for a very kind introduction. I think that you are raising the expectation above a level that I would want people to typically do, but I'm very grateful. I would like to express my gratitude to Provost Benson, who is honoring us with our presence today, and to the president of the university for his vision, and to Dr. Nenonene, who will also be moderating the Q&A session later. But let me finish with Dr. Julius Amin, who, with his extraordinary visionary leadership, has persuaded me to, we had many competitive activities, but no one can say no when Dr. Amin reached out for critical engagement. I would also like to express my gratitude to everyone who has taken off your time to be here with us tonight. So when we speak about Africa, and I would like people, if they can, who have access to the chat, if they can just mention either your country of origin or the countries in Africa that they have visited. So I like to have quite interactive session sometime. So that's one thing. Or perhaps you may also just mention in the chat what comes first when I mention Africa, for example. So when I can see people speak about the origin, Ghana, Togo, Morocco. I see also the United States. So that's great. We have people from all over the world. And please continue to share your origin. I see Ghana again, Togo again, your various origins. So, and the time for me to put together the, and I don't know if everyone can see the slides. Dr. Amin, can you see the slide? Okay,
yes,
perfect.
we can.
Wonderful. So today, I really want to present a new narrative about Africa, and while we're at Stanford University in the past decade, so we're among the people who have really contributed to build a new narrative about Africa, a continent of potential, which needs to be unlocked, but also has to face the competition of both rising and established players. So if you look at the state of the world, and that is in terms of suppliers of goods in 2000, so you see that, for example, the US was the leading suppliers of goods in most of the regions of the world. Now, fast forward a couple of decades after, China is outperforming the United States in most of the regions of the world. And in particular in Africa, where only a few countries have a special relation with the United States. And this is this evolution, or the performance of China evolved also with the development of a new narrative. In 2000, The Economist released a special issue entitled Hopeless Africa, presenting all the reasons why people should despair about the future of Africa in the 21st century. War, hunger, bad governance, among others. So what is important to bear in mind with this perception of the economists at the time is that the broader West, Western countries had about that perception. And even scholars like my colleagues of Cornell University, Nicolas van der Waal, spoke about the politics of permanent crisis, African economies and the politics of permanent crisis in a book he released in 2020, I think 2001, yes. And other authors, such as Paul Collier of Oxford University, will have the similar type of narrative. But now, a couple of decades after, especially now, but even before that, in 2010, 2011, up to 2013, many scholars came and spoke about a rising continent. What is important to bear in mind is that The Economist released another special issue mentioning the Africa Rising narrative. It is not that the Economist, when they apologized about presenting Africa as a hopeless continent, the point was not that they felt bad for having expressed a poor statement. What indeed happened is that the new trend that we have seen on the continent have just proven the Economist wrong. So today I will discuss many of those trends. I will expand also the potential of African countries and economy by 2030. And for some of the projections, I will go until 2050, discussing some of the challenges, but all those will help us better understand why we have this important competition between rising players such as China, Russia, India, among others, and the established powers such as France, the US, among other players. We will also have a special focus on China in Africa, simply because China has been such a disruptive players. So why are emerging and traditional powers competing in Africa? I released a book where I identify a series of major trends that are framing or shaping African economies. The first one is the fast population growth. By 2030, Africa will have about 1.7 billion people. And by the end of the century, Africa will reach about 40% of the global population. So this is really phenomenal. It is critical when thinking about Africa, to think about Africa in the future, because it allows to better plan and to better understand both the potential, but also the challenges that the continent may face. So up to 40% of the global population for a continent. And the fast-growing population, as we can see, is concentrated in about 7 countries, more than 50%. Countries such as Nigeria, Ethiopia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Egypt, Tanzania, Kenya, and South Africa represent more than half of the African population. Another important element to also highlight is that Africa has a youthful population. More than 50% of the African population is below the age of 25 by 2030. And as a matter of fact, by 2050, more than 50% of the newcomers in the workplace will also be African. So which means that of the population reaching the working age population. So now, so that was the first factor that I discussed, the fast population growth. Of course, when you speak about the fast population growth, some may think that it represents an opportunity to generate dividends, and others are concerned that we may also be facing challenges related to a curse. So either path will depend on the policies which will be adopted and successfully implemented or not by African policymakers. So this transitions us to the second factor, the growth of the middle class in Africa. So about 43% of the population, I don't like to speak a lot about the middle class. I prefer to speak about the percentage, the proportion of the population with discretionary income. Because as you can imagine, many people are above poverty lines and who are considered as the middle class per African Development Bank standard, for example, may also, during situation of crisis such as COVID-19, or such as the challenges that Ukraine is those challenges faced by Ukraine will also have impact on Africa. As a matter of fact, Africa import wheat from both Russia and Ukraine, and you also have the implication on the price, food price, but also on energy, among others. So, but what is important to highlight is that more than 2.5 trillion US dollar will be generated on the continent by 2030 of household consumption. And again here, unsurprisingly, food and beverages are the largest proportion, as you can see here, but you also have other consumer goods which are inclusive of education, housing, and hospitality and recreation, among other, which are important. And here too, about 50% of the consumption is in about 3 countries: Nigeria, Egypt, and South Africa. So that's an important factor to bear in mind when thinking about Africa. And Francophone Africa will have about 12%, for example, of the household consumption. But I'll explain later why it is important not to think only about countries, because we will discuss the regional dimension, but also the city dimensions. But I wanted to highlight those household consumption for now. This brings us to the third trend, the business-to-business spending. And those trends are really important because they contribute to job creation. So that's why it's important to take them into consideration. The citizen behavior, the corporate or business spending. And corporate spending or business-to-business spending will reach or exceed 4.2 trillion US dollar, and concentrated in agriculture and agri-processing, manufacturing, and construction, among others. And as you can see, many of those spendings are concentrated in areas of basic need. Whether we speak about food, beverage, we speak about agriculture, agri-processing, construction, housing, among others. So, and as a matter of fact, so when we combine the consumer and the business spending, the combined consumer and business spending by 2030 will reach about 6.7 trillion US dollar. And by 2050, it will exceed 16 trillion US dollar. So again, when thinking about Africa, it's important to shift sometime away from conflict, although we'll speak about them also later, and to think also about the potential, because this potential, the welfare of Africans will also depend on capitalizing on that potential. And here, the 3 sectors which host more than 50% of the spending, whether agriculture, manufacturing, and construction. So those sectors. Now, I like to speak about the 4th core trend, which is the fast urbanization. As a matter of fact, by 2030, Africa will have more than 17 cities of more than 5 million inhabitants, up from 6. You see the growth in 2015. And what is also really important here is that whether we speak about the global development community, or we speak about the global business community, the cultural community, those communities are approaching Africa increasingly from a city-based perspective. For example, when we look we have recently published a joint publication with the president of the Brookings Institution, trying to address fragility in the world. And we did adopt a city-based approach to fragility. So we are not only focusing, we are not anymore only focusing on country or state, but also a deeper dive in city. Similarly, even the business community will also focus on city. For example, it may be easier for some businesses to do business in Lagos, which has a larger population than Central African Republic, for example. So those are the type of approaches that people will also be adopting in the policy world, in the business world, in the cultural world, with Nollywood, among others. So a fifth trend is what we like to call at the Brookings Institution, industries without smokestacks. And when I speak about industrialization, or when people hear about industrialization in Africa, most people will be very skeptical because they will think, oh, in terms of traditional manufacturing, Africa is underperforming, at least compared to the rest of the world. But this is also because they are not thinking about the alternative trajectory of development for the continent, what we call at the Brookings Institution industries without smokestacks. Those industries may be inclusive of the ICT-based one, tourism, horticulture, agri-industries, the banking, among others. And what is important here is that they have similar characteristics when compared to traditional manufacturing. The tradability and the exportability, so that is why people promote manufacturing. The high productivity, but also the fact that they are labor-intensive industries. They absorb a high quantity of moderately skilled worker. And more importantly, when we look at exports in those areas, between 1998 and 2015, they grew 6 times faster than export in traditional manufacturing. So, which means that more jobs were also created for the continent, among other factors. So the 6th key trend is really the effort to close the infrastructure gap. And some will estimate at between 130 and 180 billion dollars that Africa needs every year to really meet the infrastructure gap. But as a matter of fact, this is a quite, and I think that those are estimates from the African Development Bank, it's a quite minimalist projection or estimate, I think, because if the continent really has to provide the citizens with the infrastructure, the quality infrastructure, which will unlock the development potential, it would really be important to generate more resources. And a recent study has identified a potential of unlocking more than 550 billion for Africa and infrastructure by engaging a broad variety of actors. So it's really important to take those into consideration. But in the recent years, we have seen an effort to bridge or to close the infrastructure gap, and China has played a critical role, which will also be discussed later. We also have the innovation as 7th key trend, especially the one aiming at unleashing agricultural and resource wealth. As a matter of fact, we often speak about it, that I don't mention it often, about the potential of drone, which started, at least on the continent, for medical delivery in Rwanda, which partnered with the World Economic Forum and Zipline to use drone for service delivery. As a matter of fact, Zipline is was a Californian company. They developed drones for healthcare delivery, but they were not able to operate in California due to the regulation, and they were able to engage and negotiate with the government of Rwanda, and a new regulation was created, allowing them to fix one critical challenge, which is related to infrastructure and delivery. So and of course, Mali has been one of the pioneers also in developing resolute mining, almost entirely automated. So this is another key point that I want to highlight. And I see that many people in the chat have expressed. I see people from Togo, Kuwait, Cameroon, and I see Kenya as well, among others. So I'm very excited to see that Dr. Amin brought people from around the world from this event. So the eighth trend that I would like to also highlight or mention is the fast digitalization and let's say the acceleration of what we call the fourth industrial revolution. As a matter of fact, in the late 90s, New York City had more mobile phone subscribers than the entire continent of Africa. And now, the continent, we have various estimates, over 600 million and some 700 million of mobile phone subscribers on the continent. So of course, many have dual subscriptions. So that's the number may be higher. But this is just to show the incredible speed of adoption that we have seen on the continent in a very short time. And the fourth industrial revolution really represents a unique opportunity for Africa to bridge the gap between the have and the have not. And my next book is on the question, Africa's role in the fourth industrial revolution. It will be released by Cambridge University Press this coming fall. And definitively, so when we speak about the fourth industrial revolution, they're inclusive of technology such as the artificial intelligence, automated vehicles, but also big data, blockchain, among other. And that fusion of technology blurring the frontier between the physical, the digital, and the digital world. So those are extremely important points. Now, another important element to highlight here is the IFC, the International Financial Corporation, estimate to about 180 billion the value of the internet economy by 2025 in Africa. So again, those will be critical to for digital connectivity, urbanization, tech talent, among other, and job creation to capitalize on the new innovation and technological opportunities. So fast digitalization. Now, the ninth trend that I also discuss is the increased support for stability and accountability. Of course, when we mention the increased support for stability and accountability, some people will say, oh, well, what about the military coup in Mali? Or what about the military coup in Burkina Faso or in Chad? And others may also inquire about governance in numerous African countries, including Uganda. But what is extremely important here is to show that Africans, citizens, per Afrobarometer surveys, support democracy. They prefer accountable government and election to choose their leader. And they prefer those also term limit, like two-term limit, for example. So, and those are between 65 and 76% of African, both in democratic and non-democratic countries. So that support for stability, for accountability, for elections, for democracy, I think are extremely important and contribute to the broader trend that we see despite some recession in terms of democratic development. And another point related to what Africans want their leaders to focus on as a priority. Africans want their leader to address, again here per Barometer Survey, to address unemployment challenges, to provide better health services, infrastructure and roads, education, and water supply. Those are the 5 top priorities for African citizens per Afrobarometer surveys. So the unemployment question, as you can see, the question of education, health, infrastructure, and water supply are areas for which leaders have to deliver should they want to gain the support from the citizens. Another important trend is the improving business environment in Africa. So in many of the countries, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, one thing that I want to highlight is that when the World Bank is doing business database was still updated regularly, the East for doing business, many of the top 10 performers, in general, about half of the top 10 performers in terms of improvement of score or in terms of reform were based on the continent, whether those countries were democratic or not. So this shows the commitment of African leaders or their understanding that there is no other path to prosperity but to create a conducive business environment. So, and I like these comparisons of the entrepreneurship perception per region, per global entrepreneurship monitor. And you can see that one thing which often impresses people is the fact that sub-Saharan Africa, green meaning outperforming and red meaning underperforming. And in between you have orange and yellow. Sub-Saharan Africa outperform most of the other regions in the world, whether East and Southeast Asia, South Asia, Middle East and North Africa, Latin America, or Eastern and Central Europe, or Central Asia, in terms of perceived opportunities. In other words, Africans believe that there are more, that the continent has more opportunities. They also believe that the continent, that it's possible to do better. The entrepreneurial intention rate is higher. I don't know if anyone want to include to write in the chat why they think that sub-Saharan Africa outperform for most of those indicators the rest of the world. So, and this could be a question to be discussed later. But also the status of entrepreneurship as a successful career is well regarded. So this shows that if the broader environment, the governance part is fixed and resources are provided for investment, the potential could be even much higher. So the 12th trend that I want to discuss is the fast regional integration and the African continental free trade area. As you know, in 2021, the 1st January 2021 was the date of the official launch of the African continental free trade area after an adoptions earlier and a ratification with the Secretary General, Wamkele Mene, who is a good friend of mine, and who in our conversation, I like to remind him that he should be a general more than a secretary because of the critical importance of not disappointing African citizens who have been used to see many initiatives. But one thing, many regional initiatives not being successfully implemented. But the AFCFTA was adopted in 2019. A sufficient number of countries has ratified it in 2020. It was supposed to be launched in 2020, but was postponed due to the pandemic until 2021. And the potential of the AFCFTA could really be phenomenal. So a drastic increase of economic output, poverty reduction, amount order, increase revenue, especially from young people, from women, and cross-border traders. So, and this graph shows some trend of the potential of the projected reduction of the AFCFTA import-related tariff and non-tariff barrier by 2035. So, again, the AFCFTA has demonstrated to the world at a time where we had the Brexit, where we have the US-China war, that Africa is showing leadership to the rest of the world through trade and through integration and continental integration. Of course, I hosted Secretary General Wamkele Mene in December, and they are accelerating the speed of negotiation for successful implementation. So the role, 13th trend is related to the role played by the diaspora. As a matter of fact, the diaspora is playing a key role on the continent, and in many countries, remittances have outperformed the official development assistance. The diaspora play a key role in African development as investor, as technological or technology transfer. They play a role in technology transfer. They are also what we like to call ambassadors that are involved in the policy making process. For example, I testified before the US Congress, before the US Senate recently, also before that, the US International Trade Commission, numerous other engagements, including developing reports designated to the executive of to some of the executive offices of the US. So the diaspora really play a monumental role. And I think that Dr. Juris Amin, who is our host tonight, is a perfect illustration of the critical role played by the diaspora in raising awareness in critical issues at play on the continent and in building bridges, advancing knowledge amongst others. So the rise of global partnership is the 14th trend that I want to highlight. As you can see in this graph, the graph represents the change of import to Africa. So the darker red represent the change in import to Africa. So that is, for example, the case of Turkey. The change in import has grown by 192% compared to the change in export from Africa, only 61% from 2006 to 2016. So you can see that the winners, if you can call them as such, are countries such as Turkey, 192 compared to 61, China 233% compared to 53%, India also not far from 200%, Indonesia and Russia. And countries which have not grown as fast in terms of trade with Africa include the United States, but also Brazil and the European Union. And this is partly explained by the fact that if a decade or a couple of decades ago, the new players were considering or were perceiving Africa as a land of opportunities, the traditional players were still looking at Africa with all lenses as a continent of despair, as illustrated by the comparison I made at the beginning. In other words, if this graph is telling us a story, is that countries, continent, but also people should shape and tell their own narrative on one hand. But on the other hand, a misperception or an inability to assess properly the potential will also be leading to a monumental loss on the long run, as we have seen for some of the players here. So I spoke about the potential, and I like to speak about the potential, but let me raise some of the challenges. I know that many more challenges will be discussed during the conversation, but of course, the limited number of quality job, political risk, country risk, people will mention corruptions, among other, or climate change related challenges. So again, I don't want to spend too much time on the challenges because we will have the time to do a deep dive there. But let me speak about corruption. And this, why do I like to share, not only focus on Africa when I show the corruption perception index? If you only look at Africa, you will only have a part of the story. You will not understand the global story about corruption. But now when you look at the rest of the entire world, you understand that across the global South, the corruption remains a critical challenge. And you also understand that even in the global North, the performance, although better in terms of Transparency International indicators, also remain heterogeneous. For example, Canada is considered as cleaner from a corruption perception index than the United States. So that is just an illustration. But still, having said that, corruption is a tremendous challenge on the continent and the cause of numerous conflict and of poverty in numerous areas. So the idea is to just not fall in the trap of the hopeless African narrative, and that's why I showed a global perspective. When we also look at the global competitiveness index, and here the darkest blue means the country are performing better compared to other, you can also see here that although the global North is outperforming with countries such as Canada, the US, France, among other. So in general, in the global South, you will see a more heterogeneous performance. And here, some of the African countries leading the way include, of course, South Africa, Botswana, the Seychelles, among others. So if I want to focus on some particular sectors, let's look at agriculture and agri-processing, for example, because it is important to provide specific illustration. So agriculture and agri-processing generate or employ about 25% of the population, and of a continent which is home to 60% of the world unused arable land, but still suffer food insecurity. This is a major challenge, but also an opportunity, especially on the fact that it is one of the fastest growing sectors, the proportion of arable land, and the growing investment that we see on the continent. So, and when we speak about, because when I mention Africa, it's good to do a deep dive in specific countries. The countries with the largest potential to unlock the agricultural sector and generate job creation and growth include Nigeria, Cameroon, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Angola, Madagascar, Mozambique, Tanzania, among others. So those are the one with the highest potential, right? The one which are the darkest blue. Also because they are coastal economies. So in the manufacturing, here you see the share of manufacturing added value in selected African economies. And manufacturing is important because it contributes to create value to the economy. With the African Continental Free Trade Area, as I mentioned before, Africa will see an increase of the manufacturing, so a faster development of the manufacturing sector. Why so? When African countries trade with the rest of the world, about 17% of the product that they export are manufactured products. But when they trade with other African countries, over 40% are transformed or manufactured products. So it's really important then to unlock continental trade in order to develop the manufacturing sector, but also to create more jobs and a more inclusive economic performance and growth. So extremely important factor here. And those are simply some of the illustration of the foreign direct investment inflow. So here also the African Continental Free Trade Area represents a phenomenal opportunity to unlock the manufacturing potential. So, and some people are wondering, with the digitalization of the global economy, China is supposed to lose about 85 to 100 million labor-intensive jobs. Will those jobs come to Africa? So that is a question of debate. Will they be automated sampling? Will they be coming to Africa, or will Africa also be transforming the economy in a way that require fewer jobs? So, of course, some countries have larger potential than others. For example, Egypt, South Africa, Morocco, for the size, but also the size and the competitiveness. But if you add the size, but with a lower competitiveness, you also include Nigeria, for example. So just as a quick illustration. And why have we seen that? And I ask people who may be interested to write in the chat if they have thought about some of the response, some of the drivers of the digitalization, of the fast growth of the mobile industry, of tech industry in Africa, the youthful population, the also increase of broader income and the rapid urbanization. So those were some of the factors which have been drivers of the growth in the technology sector. And as I mentioned earlier, some of the key technologies of the 4I are inclusive of the artificial intelligence and 3D printing, Internet of Things, drone, automated vehicles, among others. African countries, and we are working now with the United Nations Development Program to really shape the role of Africa in leading the fourth industrial revolution. And that commitment will make a monumental difference in transforming, in making African economy more competitive globally. Now, if I briefly focus before coming to the global comparison on how China has been disruptive in Africa. And this will tell a global story and not just an African story. So you can see here the exponential growth of export to Africa from almost nothing in the late 80s, early 90s, to a substantial increase in millions of dollars in 2018. And I did not necessarily add many of the data from 2020 to now due to the COVID-19, so it doesn't show the broader accurate trend. So you can clearly see here, China is becoming a prominent player in Africa. It's not just about growth, although I will speak about many of the other factors later. I also want to highlight the fact that in terms of education, of English-speaking countries, China became the first destination of English-speaking Africans for higher education. China is also, or has also been training African journalists. The last time I checked, the number was about 1,000 per year, offering them scholarship to study in China. And you know that who are the people telling the narrative? They are the journalists, among others. And China was also training some of the negotiators. So again, those same negotiators who may be negotiating with China. When you think about the long-term impact of those, China is the first trade partner of African countries, the first investor in infrastructure, the first bilateral investor in terms of infrastructure, among others. So again, just think about it and think about the role played by other countries. So China also import more from Africa, but much less than export to Africa. So you can see that the trend is relatively modest here compared to the trend to export. In terms of lending, the lending question. So in terms of lending, 3 sectors receive the majority of the Chinese lending to Africa. Those are transport, power, and mining. Those 3 sectors. And some of the countries which have been the largest recipient include Angola, Ethiopia, Kenya of Chinese lending on the country. So you can see the growth of annual Chinese lending. So you have a broader trend toward growth versus the contrary. And many of the loans come from the Exim Bank, so which clearly demonstrate the critical importance played by the Chinese government. And China also prefer to speak about development finance more than assistance. So you can see that perception of partnership. And just to tell you a story about this, although I may not disclose the names, an official delegation coming from Africa did visit us a few years ago, many years ago. And what the Chinese told them, they were visiting the US to negotiate with the US. And the Chinese, some representative of the Chinese told them that anything the US will commit, we can double. And our president will pay you an official state visit. So you can see the aggressive diplomacy. And in comparison, the former president of the United States has not visited sub-Saharan Africa at all. And that is the first time that it happened for several decades, at least 3 decades, more, probably near to 4 decades, at least. So this just demonstrates the difference in approach that some players have to outperform the established economies. And this is also another illustration of the Chinese port investment in Africa, where the Chinese are either operator, builders, or funders. So you can see that in many cases, they play all the roles. They are operator, they are builders, and they are funders. But if they're not playing all the roles, they play at least one or a couple of them, all across Africa. This just gives an illustration as to how aggressive some of those players may be to capitalize on the potential of Africa. One of the reasons why I started by showing you the potential is that people will not understand why those players are competing so hard on the continent if you don't understand what is at stake. So the FDI stock is growing. So the on the continent, so you have here is the flow and the stock. And of course, you have probably read in many articles that the Chinese workers are moving to Africa and taking over in some industries and among others. So those are some of the questions which have sparked numerous debates. So FOCAC, everyone knows about FOCAC, about the commitments, about the updates. So I will not spend a lot of time, but it's an important tool for the Chinese diplomacy. So although typically the Chinese commitments are not direct, so they are blended financial models. So there's something, when you hear a commitment of $60 billion, it is not a direct transfer. It's a blended model. And many challenges come with those involvement. So you have the perceived low commitment to really include and to really build capacity in Africa compared to the established players. Limited transfer of technology and also the sustainability of the projects is perceived as one of the challenge. And the limiting or the limited bargaining ability of African nation often lead to unfair partnerships. You read often, when I testify before the Senate, those were some of the key questions that were discussed with the senators. So, and I will conclude with this final section much shorter. So I'm used to speak for like entire days, but I was asked to deliver this in about 50 minutes. So I will try not to exceed it too much. So I just want you to pause on and to think a little bit about some key graphs. Here is an illustration of the regional summits with African leaders. You can clearly see that France, since the 90s, has been involved and has organized on a quite regular basis various France-Africa summits. We have also TICAD with Japan, which has been relatively active since the early 90s. And then China came. And if you compare the rise of the Chinese China-Africa summit of FOCAC, is also quite aligned with the trend that I have shown recently of increased trade with Africa. The European Union came, stepped in, and in the recent year, in the past, a little bit more than the past decade, we have seen new players, India, Turkey, and then Russia, the US, and the Arab countries organizing summit, African summit. So this just shows the growth and the critical importance that Africa has in the global political economy. But it is not just about the summit. we have also seen a growth of military bases in Africa. Of course, some countries, and when you speak about military bases, some are complete bases, or maybe we had about 11 bases, and other could be called presences. They are not necessarily bases, but you have a relative important military presence. But you also have what some will call outpost. So China and in Djibouti. So Djibouti is definitively one of the areas where you have one of the highest concentration, whether you speak about the Saudi, the Italian, the Japanese, the German, the Chinese, the US, and the French. So that competition is real. So it's not just about the economic competition, you also have the military competition, the geostrategic competition, and now the Russia-Ukraine challenge that we have will definitively reframe this map very soon. And since the map was drafted, you also have the French who decided, for example, to withdraw from Mali, among others. So it is quite dynamic, but I just want to show the trends. When you also think about the total exports by partners, you can clearly see the evolution, how China went from almost inexistent and has grown continuously to play a prominent role compared to the advanced economies, which even if they have continued to grow, we are speaking about a combination of many countries compared to a single one. So that is just to show you, again, those dynamics. And let me finish here with the question of soft power. A paradox, if we can call it as such, is that the two countries that per Afrobarometer surveys African citizens consider as their model of development are the US and China. The US is outperforming China, and the gap has even become larger since with the most recent survey. So which means that Africans really believe that the US is the US, which represents the liberal from an economic perspective conception of development, is better than the Chinese one. But they also consider the Chinese one is better than the French or the UK one. So that is the paradox that we have, on which I want to end to say Africa has a phenomenal potential by 2030 and 2050. The continent is being transformed, and the continent will be reaching about 40% of the global population by the end of the century. And this time is for Africa. Africa is open, and thank you very much for your precious attention. And I look forward for the discussion or Q&A session. You are muted, Dr. Amin. You are still muted.
You are mute.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll throw this back while I'm sure others are getting ready to for the questions. Again, as I said, this is wonderful. A lot of tremendous information, in a lot of concrete, factual information to understand where Africa has been and where Africa is going, and what the pitfalls may be. I want to throw a question about China. I mean, years ago when I gave a talk at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base here in Dayton to military officers going to African countries, one of them stated that China has a line item in the budget for people who go to Africa for corruption. Pay if you have to pay to get the things done. And when you talk about some of what was said in meetings with Chinese officers, that the leaders are willing to pay double what the United States will, that came to my mind. But the question I have for you is that I have read somewhere that African nations individually are no match for China in terms of negotiation. That African nations would have to negotiate as a group. They need to form a group, organize themselves in order to negotiate with China. So my question is, what do you think about that? Is that something that is happening? Or based on how you understand African nations, are they capable of forming a conglomerate, forming, say, for example, members of ECOWAS or African Union say, okay, this is what we need from you. China, if you don't want to do it, get lost. Is it possible for African nations to do that?
Thank you very much. This is an extremely important question, and we have engaged extensively. And perhaps just ahead of answering, I want to connect it to connect the question with a key trend. Even when taken together, the African nations represent less than 3% of global trade. So individually, the countries cannot outperform in negotiation global players, whether China, the US, among others. So the direct answer to your question is definitively African countries individually will never be able to outperform China in negotiation. Not because they're not good negotiator, but just because China has much more leverage, and China can also buy time and among others. But they can try to negotiate fairer deals. So they going perhaps a shift. We need a shift from the idea of outperforming to the idea of having a mutually beneficial deal. And for this to happen, African leaders have to think about their citizens. They have to think about what the citizens are prioritizing. And they also have to do your due diligence. We have often seen official video or picture of negotiations where some delegations, the Chinese delegation, they have, those delegations are sometimes larger. They have notes, they come well prepared. Where on the other side, many of the African delegations do not come well prepared or are understaffed in their negotiation team. Now, shifting this to the continental level, this is a conversation we have had also with the Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area, and that is one of their goals. Their goal is how to create a unique position of Africa on key issues related to trade, related to investment, related to other factors. And that is what they have tried to achieve, including when negotiating here in the United States. I can't tell you, I was part of some of the, I provided capacity building training to some of the delegations coming from African ministries, and I participated to some of the engagements that they had with the US counterpart. And I can tell you that myself was surprised to see the level of convergence in the African group when they decide to deliver properly. So, and I'm just saying this to say it is possible. I have seen it firsthand here in Washington, D.C., when they were negotiating at the beginning, to tell the little story, at the beginning of the negotiation, the US was skeptical about the African Continental Free Trade Area. In off-the-record conversation, some even say, well, this is not something we can support. It's just another initiative. We want to first see when it will be implemented and successfully implemented. But the African group spoke with one voice. Many think tanks have drafted numerous briefs. And one day I was called also to brief the new African ambassador, the new American ambassador to the African Union, asking me my perspective. And I was trying to be a little bit like tactful. And she said, no, just tell it as you see it. And I clearly mentioned there's no other way the US will say that they want African to direct their own development, and they will not be supporting an initiative by African for African and interested in partnering with the rest of the world. A few months later, we had a statement of the US, or many months later, we have a statement of the US supporting the African Continental Free Trade Area and acknowledging it as a key partnership for development. So those type of initiatives are important, and the continental position will still have challenges. Sometimes some country will not be aligned with the position of the majority, but I have seen that it is not impossible.
Okay. There is a question here on the Q&A from Jeva Singala. Reads, thank you for this eye-opening presentation. There have been accusations that Chinese investments in Africa in substandard equipment. Is this true? And if so, should this be of concern to potential partners from the continent?
So that's a very good question. Thank you so much for asking. So what I typically say is that, and I think Julius, Dr. Amin also mentioned it. He mentioned the ongoing corruption in many partnerships. People or government will get what they pay for. So, especially as contrary to the US, where citizens will be sued if they are involved in corrupt activities on the continent. In many places of the world, as you have seen, in many of the developing nations, corruption is quite generalized. So definitively, many concerns have been raised about the quality of the equipment, the quality of road, the quality of buildings that the Chinese are providing. But on the other hand, I have also heard many other people saying that at least they see what the Chinese are doing. So when engaging with the Senate, one of the recommendations I made is you have to do more and better, because if you are not doing so, there is no empty seat. The Chinese will occupy the space, and they are not the same type of partner like the US. The US will provide probably more likely a better quality, will be less involved in corruption. I'm not saying that there's no corruption, but I say less involved in corruption. And will also be mindful, or at least will have a conversation about governance, and not just looking the other way when leaders may be abusing their own citizens. So yes, it is a concern for most of the partnerships. African leaders are well informed, but one of the challenges is that they don't have many alternatives. And I was discussing with the head of state, and he said, it is not just because of China. Even if the resources or investment were coming from Mars, they will be willing to take it because the need in investment is just so monumental that they are willing to work with a broad variety of actors.
And there is another question that U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken was in Africa and spoke about the importance of Africa. What initiatives do you think, or are you aware of, that the United States is taking to become more involved in Africa?
Yeah, that is another great question. So let me probably start, and I don't know if I contributed or not to delay the launch of the new foreign policy, U.S. policy toward Africa, because I recall the day I was testifying before the Senate, journalists reached out to me and to say, there's a new Biden policy or U.S. policy, Africa policy, which will be released. Can you share more about it? But during my engagement or in my recommendations, I mentioned that instead of making big announcements, they should do a deeper analysis and think about, engage with African, think about what Africans are prioritizing for a successful development of a U.S. policy. So it will also be released soon. So I think I can share it here. So early when the Biden administration was appointed, I was contacted by the National Intelligence Council to develop a U.S. Africa strategy. So the report is entitled, unless the name is changed before it is released, but seizing the momentum of engagement with Africa. So how the US can really seize that unique momentum with many of the recommendations, and as the feedback that we receive is that many of those have been used to inform the new policy, the new African policy. And let me just speak about Prosper Africa and why I think that Prosper Africa, although very important, could be is an important tool, although quite challenged and criticized. Prosper Africa was launched under the previous administration in an effort to coordinate action of the US government when engaging with Africa and build mutual prosperity, especially when it comes to trade and investment. You have various US agencies who are involved in the process, and they really, the challenge or the opportunity first of Prosper Africa is the fact that it's really the first attempt in US history to really ensure that all the organizations working on Africa speak with one another. But the challenge is that, and I recommended to adjust it, to address it, they had a chief operating officer instead of having a chief executive officer, because someone else was playing the role of chief executive officer de facto, or as chairperson de facto. So that is the agility needed to ensure the successful implementation of US policy toward Africa. Other area that the US will probably have also announced and projects need to be firmed up, the trade and investment or leadership forum. So those were not organized during the past administration, but as a matter of fact, it's important to engage at the highest level with policymaker, with business leader, if one is ready to achieve a deal at a faster speed. In the graph that I have shown, you see that many of the other countries, the ones who are outperforming in particular, have had those interactions on a regular basis compared to the recent trend. So I just wanted to really highlight that there are areas where the US is involved. The US remain involved in the oil and gas sector. They have a lot of interest there in the natural resource sector, in information and communication technologies, among other sector, but they should do more. For example, in education, as I said, China is outperforming the US and the UK by welcoming more students from English-speaking nations. So, and China has outperformed in terms of trade. We have the AGOA, the Africa Growth Opportunity Act, which is set to expire in 2025. And conversations are ongoing on what could the future of AGOA be. So this is another, and AGOA really allow African countries to export to the US without paying taxes or without paying fees. So those are amount, but in order to be eligible, countries have to meet specific criteria of good governance. And AGOA has been criticized by African nations as a tool, as a political tool to penalize the countries which may choose a road or which is not aligned with the US interests. For example, Rwanda, when Rwanda decide to ban the import of second-hand clothes, the US retaliated by penalizing Rwanda related to those questions. So again, so the US is present in many areas. The US has been present also in the humanitarian sector, investing in health, among other. Many of the vaccines received by Africa during the pandemic were also done during were also done or supported and funded, highly funded by the US. So those are specific area of growth. The US has also been heavily involved in the fight against HIV, AIDS, among others. So I'm not saying the US is involved, but I think that compared to the potential, the US could do much more.
Okay. Okay, one last question. This question is from Emily Songolo. Thank you very much for this data-rich presentation. Population growth is one of the persistent problems of the continent. My question is, how can the migrations of young Africans be staved off, and what to do about the discrepancy between the old men in power and the young men and women kept out of power?
So that's many questions in one. So, okay, let me start with the first one. Migrations. There are many factors. I don't want to be overly simplistic, which affect the migration, because even in some of the advanced economy, you will see a different type of migrations, but you will still see migrations. And a second point I also want to mention is you have more migration on the continent than between the continent and the other continents. In other words, Africans are more likely to move from an African country to another African country than from Africa to Europe, contrarily to the broader perception. But having said that, various factors contribute to migration. First, the lack of job or the lack of quality jobs in many countries. Many perceive foreign countries to be the place where they can build a better standard of living. So I think you also have governance, poor governance, unaccountable governance, non-inclusive governance, make people, independently of if they have job or no, feel not necessarily welcome or not participating to the prosperity of your country at the fullest. So that is another key factors which could help. But definitively, the first and foremost factor, I think, is economic development, the quality of the economy, especially the employment opportunity for young people, for women, among other, plus a space for accountability, for inclusion in the policy-making process, in the democratic process. I think those are also variable or aspects which are really critical. So I really want to highlight those, but we have many more. So again, so as I mentioned, conflict are exacerbating also the lack of educational opportunities among other. Now, Power, and power. Education is critical. So first, I want to mention that many people who were in power have fallen in a way that most were not anticipating. Whether we speak about Tunisia, we speak about Zimbabwe, we speak about Libya, even more recently, we speak about Mali and Burkina Faso, among others. So the best way to really address the challenge of term limit is you have a set of recommendations that I can make, but one of the first and foremost one I think will be related to education. Democratic development happen through, we have different trajectories for democratic development. One is democratization through elite, and you have different type of democratization through elites. In the case of many Latin American countries, democracy evolved without democrats, because you have the hardliner, the one who was supporting the dictators, and the soft liner, the one who were opposed to the hard dictatorial line. They were controlling each other, so they created a spontaneous check and balance, which has led later to democracy. In Africa, democracy, in most of the case, democracy occurred through popular mobilization. I think Nicolas van der Waal and Bratton and van der Waal, in their publication, they call what you have popular mobilization. So that is one key factor. And then you have the opening of the political sphere, and then you have the founding election. So the crisis during the 90s, when many of the African countries democratized, the crisis was during a period of economic crisis. Leaders in many countries were repressing those economic movement become political movement and as the leader could not oppress everyone, those political movement, they have to open. So political liberalization, so popular mobilization, political liberalization, and founding election. So they have to open, so what we call political liberalization. And then that has led to election. But you have to grow a civil society and inform civil society. So, and that goes through education. You have citizens have to vote. There are 4 or 5 layers of accountability, like in a Brookings publication that I released. The first one is the personal accountability. To what extent young people, but also leaders, are individually accountable and dedicated. You also have the peer accountability. To what extent the peer could be engaging with the one who are not accountable. Then the third layer is the vertical accountability. The vertical accountability is related to election. Do we have election? Are they free? Are they fair? Are they transparent? Do we have an open space for competition, for contestation? The third layer is the vertical, the horizontal accountability, checks and balance. To what extent do we have, let's say, the judiciary and the legislature having a control on one another, also on the executive? And finally, what some would call the diagonal accountability, which is the role played by the civil society, by mobilization, by watchdogs. So there is not a single perfect solution. In other words, I think that the action should be at multiple levels, including education, including voting, including mobilizing, being mobilized in the broader society among others. And perhaps even if many are not likely to do so, I think those all people in power should also take their responsibility and be individually accountable. We have not seen many cases, but we have seen some. In a piece that I published in the Washington, The Hill, I mentioned some example of leaders who, despite the fact that they could have run for, they could have went after another mandate, decided to do otherwise. So it also happened, but action is better than the contrary, because, as you know, there is no empty seat in politics.
That is so wonderful. So again, Landry, I want to, on behalf of the University of Dayton, on behalf of all the people who are here, I want to thank you very, very much for an exceptional presentation. You have given us much to reflect, much to think about, and much to help us begin to ask more difficult questions. And the goal of the Global Voices Symposium is to challenge ourselves to think about this global space in which we find ourselves, and to also ask ourselves what contribution we can make to make the place better, irrespective of which country we come from or irrespective of which country in which we live. Again, I want to thank you very, very much. Thank you. To folks who were there, good night. Thank you for joining us. Wonderful. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Au revoir.
Au revoir, monsieur.